Thanks very much for making the time to come along this evening. I think my slides are going to be quite short and concise to the point, but I think what I'm trying to do this evening is just to give you a little bit of flavor of, what a neighbourhood plan is, the sort of stuff it can do, and the steps that you might need to go through when you're preparing a neighbourhood plan, and just to give a little bit of context of why we're actually having this webinar in the first place. So Locality are working with Birmingham Community Matters and in partnership to prepare a neighbourhood planning toolkit for Birmingham City Council. And the purpose of that toolkit is to help and support community groups get involved in neighbourhood planning. So this webinar will sort of feed into that toolkit. And just a little bit about me and a little bit about Locality. So Locality essentially run the government's neighbourhood planning support program. So we offer grant support, technical support. We have a whole host of learning resources on the website, and my role within that is sort of managing that program. So as I've already said, we're going to run through what is a neighbourhood plan, what can a neighbourhood plan do, what stages are involved, tell you a little bit more about how this work links in with Birmingham City Council, and also Karen will give you a little bit of a flavour of Birmingham Community Matters towards the end, and then we'll go into the question. So what is a neighbourhood plan? So it's essentially a document that is prepared by the community that includes planning policies for a neighbourhood area. And planning policies are used by the planning team within Birmingham City Council to determine applications for new development. So for example, if an application comes in for a housing development, the planning team at Birmingham City Council will take a look at the proposal, the number of houses proposed, the types of houses proposed, the design of that housing, and they'll cross-check that against the Birmingham City local plan, but also the policies in the neighbourhood plan. And if there's conflicts with any of those policies, then it reduces the likelihood of that development being given the go-ahead, because it's clearly not the type of development that Birmingham City Council want to see, given it would conflict with the local plan policies, but also, just as importantly, not the type of development the community might want to see, given the policies within the neighbourhood plan. And one of the great selling points about neighbourhood plans are they actually carry legal weight in decision making. So once a neighbourhood plan is made, it has the same weight as Birmingham City Council's local plan. So it can't be ignored, and that's a very powerful thing. So let's run through a couple of examples of the types of things neighbourhood plans have done in practice to date. So one of the great selling points of neighbourhood planning is that it can decide where new housing should go. So within a neighbourhood plan, a community can on and off draw up where they would like new housing development to happen. And then again, that will then be taken into account by the planning officers when applications come in for housing development. The Stradbroke neighbourhood plan is a really good example of this. So you can see the little drawing there, kind of the sort of light yellowish colour where the housing would go, and then you can see the sort of green open space on the road network. So it goes quite specific. It not only does it allocate that site for housing, it also influences what that housing would need to look like should a planning application come forward. It specifies how many homes on the site, the mix of land use, and specifies the need for community use and green space. So you can do quite a lot, and it helps you essentially, especially if you live in an area where there's a lot of development coming forward, essentially you can use your neighbourhood plan to help shape where that development should go, but also what it should look like. Another great thing that we see neighbourhood planning groups do is they use their neighbourhood plan as a tool to decide on the mix of new housing so that it genuinely reflects local need. So the Salton Tony neighbourhood plan, and when they were preparing their neighbourhood plan, they realised that data from the area essentially showed that there was demand for smaller dwellings, and that was because there was a need for older people to downsize who were living in larger homes, which then essentially meant that it freed up the larger homes to allow families to move in. So essentially helping to take account of the fact that there was quite a greying population with a lot of single people living in quite large houses, that actually there was a lack of large houses for newly forming households and new families to be able to get into. So the policy in the neighbourhood plan sought to address that, and they did that by essentially specifying that where there is a development coming forward of less than 10 homes, it should be made up of 3 bedrooms or less. And that's quite a nice example policy, because one of the things we often hear when we're working with groups is there is housing coming forward. It's just not the housing that the community needs. We don't need, big detached executive style homes. We need small numbers of bedrooms for newly starting out families. And one of the benefits as well is that often the smaller the house, not always, but the smaller the house, then they can tend to be more affordable as well. So that just essentially shows you how neighbourhood plans can be a really good tool to get housing that genuinely reflects local need. Another big selling point of neighbourhood plans is that they can shape the design of new development through setting out design guidance. So we can see here the Hazelbury Bryan neighbourhood plan. This plan basically included multiple sets of design guidance that was bespoke to individual areas within the neighbourhood plan area. It specified the number of stories for development, some areas 2 stories, some areas 3 stories, the materials to be used, and boundary treatments. And you can see here, they've got like a palette of materials. So they said, we'll accept development that includes limestone, red brick, white painted brick, dry stone and red clay brick. And that was essentially drawn from an analysis of the existing historical housing in the area. And essentially they were able to use their plan to ensure that when new housing or new development does come forward, it is consistent and in keeping with the character of the already established area. Another thing the neighbourhood plans can do is they can protect local green spaces that you as a community might value, essentially by designating green spaces as local green space. And what that basically means is, over the course of the plan, it would be very, very difficult to build on those protected green spaces. So it essentially safeguards sites within your community, green spaces that you might use, for walking the dog or just sort of getting out of the house, that sort of thing. It helps protect those and make sure that development doesn't happen on those because there's something you value. And we can see an example with Roman Road, neighbourhood plan area in London. I've chosen that example because it's a sort of quite highly developed area, which isn't too dissimilar from a lot of places within Birmingham as well. So it's just nice to see a similar context. Another great thing that neighbourhood plans can do is that where a neighbourhood plan, well, actually, I'll take a step back. So in Birmingham City Council, when a developer wants to build within the administrative boundaries, essentially they need to give a developer contribution, and that's called a community infrastructure levy. And what that community infrastructure levy is essentially then used by the council to fund, much needed infrastructure for communities. And one of the great selling points of neighbourhood plans is that where a neighbourhood plan is in place, the actual local community themselves get to have a greater say on what that community infrastructure levy can be used for. And in particular, there is a portion of that levy called the community portion, and that where there is a neighbourhood plan in place, that is 25% of the whole levy as a whole, and that is specifically sort of presented for the neighbourhood planning group to decide which local infrastructure projects they would like to prioritise and bring forward within their communities. So essentially, it brings more contributions from developers into the area to bring forward the stuff that you need. And the example here I've chosen is the Brighton neighbourhood plan. And they included a community objective to create a community venue and a cafe, and essentially the increased community infrastructure developer contribution monies that they collected thanks to the neighbourhood plan being in place enabled them to buy a cottage and restore it, and has now essentially created a community cafe and hub for the whole neighbourhood, which is really nice and just shows the benefits of having a neighbourhood plan. And again, like thinking of the London context, because again, it's urban. Sudbury Neighbourhood Plan and the Harleston Neighbourhood Plan have identified as policies within those plans priority projects that they would like those developer contributions to be used for. So the top right hand corner, the red box, that's Sudbury Town, and you can see they want to use the funds collected under the provisions of the Community Infrastructure Levy for an expanded public realm scheme, a new library space, road improvements, new cycling routes and facilities. And the bottom example there is the one from the Harleston Neighbourhood Plan, and they want to use the increased developer contribution that goes to them for improvements to the pedestrian environment. Again, new cycle routes, that's a really popular one. Planting new street trees, provision and laying out of new public open space, and improvement of existing open space, provision of state play space in the streets, town centre improvements, and community facilities. So, having a neighbourhood plan can really help you realise some of your wider community objectives so that the facilities that you need actually come to fruition. They also can maintain the provision of community facilities, including youth centres and community halls. Queen's Park Neighbourhood Plan is quite a nice example, and that policy essentially sought to safeguard against the loss of community facilities unless there is a good reason for that loss. And I'll just quickly run you through some of the wording of the policy because it is quite interesting. Essentially, the policy says development proposing the loss of community use will only be permitted where it can be demonstrated that there is no longer any demand for it or an alternative community use. And it goes on to say that development proposals for new community uses will be supported, including the provision of artist workspace and play space areas. And I think that's sort of quite a common theme with a lot of the groups we work with. They're worried that, they're starting to see a sort of deficit in community spaces, facilities on the high street or wider in the community because they're being lost by other abuses, which essentially means that neighbourhoods sort of on their own as an entity aren't really fulfilling the needs of the people that live there. And this is a nice way of protecting and safeguarding against that. Of course, one of the other main things is neighbourhood plans can protect and enhance the natural environment. If you have a look at the Big Green Neighbourhood Plan, they have an entire natural environment section. The plan includes policies to protect woodlands, trees, hedgerows, wildlife sites and habitat, and to improve biodiversity. And also, quite interestingly, neighbourhood plans can help you respond innovatively and creatively to making the best use of underutilised and empty sites and properties through encouraging neat wild and temporary pop-up uses. So if you have a look at the Out of Dogs neighbourhood plan, it basically specifies that where planning permission has been permitted for large-scale development, and that development hasn't been built out within a certain time frame, and the site is just sitting there dormant, then certain temporary uses would be allowed before construction commences. And in the Out of Dogs plan, they have this policy, and they actually specify in the policy the types of temporary and meanwhile uses that would be supported, which I think is really interesting. So temporary pocket parks, a portable workspace, temporary farmers markets, pop-up retailer restaurants, cultural and sporting facilities and activities, public art and lighting installations. So there's some really good examples of, which is quite good in sort of high pressure development areas where perhaps, there are a lot of sites that are at various stages of development, or they're just sort of the planning permission is there, but nothing has happened on the site for a while. You could use your neighbourhood plan so that you can, in the temporary at least, make the most of those sites and bring in things that the community might want to see. So I just thought that was a really nice example of the types of things you could do on those spaces. While neighbourhood plans can inevitably do an awful lot, of course, they can't do everything. And so I just thought it was worth giving you a little flavour of some of the stuff they can't do, because I think it's good to manage expectations from the get-go. So, they can't introduce new speed limits or redirect traffic flows. That's beyond the realms of land use planning. That's something for transport teams. Again, they can't direct processes and standards for litter and rubbish collection. They can't influence existing developments such as housing where planning permission isn't required. So, installation of new windows. And another important one is they can't influence the delivery of local services. So, you can't use your neighbourhood to increase the provision of bus services and train services. That's just beyond the realms of neighbourhood planning. I don't want to be negative, because as you can see from the other slides, there really is a lot that neighbourhood plans can do, but I just thought it was worth shining a little bit of light on that as well. So now I've told you what neighbourhood plans can do. I thought it was maybe helpful to take you through the process at a very high level. As I said at the start, they carry legal weight. It's not something that can be ignored in decision making. So, you wouldn't be surprised to find that given that they carry that legal weight, there are a set of processes that you would need to go through, and that takes time. So I'm just going to shine a bit of light on those quite quickly. So the first stage is getting started. You have an idea, neighbourhood planning might be something I'm interested in. So the first thing you would do is have a look and see if it's already happening in your area. To get an idea if it is happening in your area, you could go on to Birmingham City Council website. They will list where neighbourhood planning is happening, and usually that is accompanied by a map for each individual application, so you can see, do you live within an area that is already being subject to neighbourhood plan, or can you get the ball rolling yourself? And if it is already happening, then you can get involved in that process. And then once you've decided, neighbourhood planning, I like the sound of it, it's not happening in my area, I can start the ball rolling. You'll want to start undertaking some early engagement with the local community. So to get a feed for what they think the local issues are, and then to kind of weigh up, okay, these are the local issues that the community have flagged. Knowing what I know about what a neighbourhood plan can do, is a neighbourhood plan the best tool for me? Or do I need, will a neighbourhood plan alone work, or do I need a neighbourhood plan and other tools? So get to that stage, and then, once you go through that exercise and you say there is merit in doing a neighbourhood plan, the next stage is your forum and area designation. And basically, in areas without a parish or town council, which I would say will probably be the vast majority of Birmingham, a group will have to create a neighbourhood forum, which is essentially made up of 21 members who either live, work, do business, or are elected representatives within that area. You will need to submit that forum application to Birmingham City Council. You'll also need to submit a neighbourhood area application, which essentially specifies the geographical extent of the area in which your neighbourhood plan policies would apply. And then essentially what happens then is basically Birmingham City Council will consider your application for forum and area designation, and all being well, that will be approved. Those applications will be approved, and then you can kind of get stuck into the neighbourhood plan making itself. And one of the next stages of prep of a neighbourhood plan, once you've got your area and the forum designated, is the evidence gathering stage. So you'll need to talk to people locally again to find out what's important to them. You'll need to gather evidence to back up the ideas the community wants to see, and they will then feed into the policies in your neighbourhood plan. A lot of that evidence will already exist because it will possibly underpin the local plan within the council. So you would chat to Birmingham City Council planners just to get a beat for what evidence is already there. you'd also have to collect some evidence yourself, because there will be gaps, especially because, the purpose of the neighbourhood plan is to build on what's in Birmingham City Council's local plan and to add local detail and fill in gaps through your neighbourhood plan. And I mentioned a bit at the start, we have a lot of locality, have a lot of learning resources on our website, and a lot of them focused around supporting groups with evidence gathering. So we've toolkits and guidance to help you develop good design and encourage good design in new development. We've a how-to toolkit that sets out how to designate sites as local green space within your neighbourhood plan, how to allocate sites for housing, how to bring forward that housing that reflects local need, and how to protect and enhance the natural environment. So there's a lot of support out there to help you. And then once you've gathered all your evidence and you've sort of been informally consulting with the local community on it, the next step is to take all that evidence and the feedback and then translate that into planning policies within your neighbourhood plan. And as I showed, some of the examples earlier. So for example, if during the evidence gathering stage and chatting to the local community, it becomes really clear that design is a priority for local residents, and local residents are concerned about the quality of design and new developments coming forward, then chances are you probably want to have a policy that tries to sort of shape good design via the neighbourhood plan. And again, locality has a toolkit that will help you specifically with writing neighbourhood plan policies as well. And once you've drafted the plan, you then have to take the plan to the statutory stage called the pre-submission consultation. And all that basically means is, once you drafted the plan, putting it back out to the community, seeing what the community think, getting their views, and then you'll take their views, they'll action the ones that you feel that you need to action and you think that make sense to action, and then you'll then submit the plan to Birmingham City Council, and this is sort of formally referred to as Regulation 15 submission. And then once you've submitted it to Birmingham City Council, they'll do a check to make sure you submitted all the relevant and necessary documentation. Then there will be another consultation period before an examination, and support saying again that point about legal weight and neighbourhood plans being lucky enough to benefit from legal weight. They need to be subjected to an examination to make sure that they meet certain necessary legal checks. So some of the things would be, it has to be in general conformity with the strategic policies in Birmingham City Council's local plan, for example. So the examiner will essentially appraise all your policies within the neighbourhood plan. They might suggest some amendments to your policy to make sure that it meets those legal checks. And then after the examination, you'll discuss with Birmingham City Council, and then a decision will be made on whether or not to send the plan out to referendum, which basically is like any referendum. You ask a very simple question: do you want this neighbourhood plan to be used to shape decisions when considering planning applications, yes or no? And more than 50% of the people within the community vote for the plan, then it will be formally made, and that means it will then start to be used by the planning team within Birmingham City Council when deciding on planning applications within your area. So that's just a little bit of a whirlwind through the various stages. I appreciate, I brought an awful lot out of you, but that's just hopefully gives you enough of a flavor of what neighbourhood plans can do, and a little bit in terms of what the process is involved. And I said at the start, I'll give you a bit more information about, where this webinar fits in and where our toolkit fits in. So essentially, this event forms part of a locality in Birmingham Community Matters work for the Neighbourhood Development and Support Network at Birmingham City Council. And essentially, it forms part of a wider toolkit that we're preparing for community groups and interested people like yourself, as part of a pilot and funding the Birmingham City Council have been given from central government.